So for tonight, we'll be reading from Kali Rising, which is Swami Ravi's most recent book a few years ago.
Right.
It's a Tantra text, and it's a conversation between Shiva and primarily it's a introduction to Tantra with the format is a conversation between Shiva and Shakti. And for tonight, a few of the current Tantra teacher training students will be reading a couple passages from the text, and there'll be a short bit of time between each reading for some questions or comments, and for Rudy. And yeah, do you want to say anything before we start?
Yeah, just keep in mind that the dialogue is not just between these deities that are Indian, but it's really between, it's a insight into the dialogue that goes on inside of each of us between our own masculine and our own feminine. So it has multi dimensions, like it is an interchange between these cosmic forces, Shiva and Shakti, but it's also a representation of the typical dynamic between a man and a woman, but it's also an example of the kind of dialogue that goes on within your own mind between the aspects of yourself. So you might listen to it with that in mind.
Great. Shane.
Hello, I'm Shane Young. I'm from San Francisco, and like Carol said, I'm part of the third round of cookies, little batch of cookies that's being put out in the Tantra Teacher Training Program, and I'm super excited to announce some of our readers tonight. We've got Ellen McIntyre from Newton, Massachusetts, and Michael King from the lands of the indigenous Dena'ina First Nation peoples of Alaska, otherwise known as Anchorage. And the section they're going to be reading is from our second principle from the Kali Rising book, the dynamic between Tapas, containment, and Spanda, the life force, is at the heart of the process of birth and transformation. I'll let you guys take it away.
Tantra is all about enabling spontaneity. We often refer to this with the Sanskrit root word spanda, from which the English spontaneous comes. Spanda, the fundamental vibrating quality of everything in the universe, is the tendency to move back and forth, if it's the vibrating of a body at rest, or out into action if it's not. We all have that inherent capacity and desire to act, to manifest something, our desires, our dreams, our compassion, love, etc. In fact, that's probably what we all want for ourselves in our deepest heart of hearts, to be able to live in a totally spontaneous way. After all, isn't that what freedom really means? To express our most genuine impulses freely and without constraint, in a way that we know is loved, valued, and precisely what is needed from us at that moment.
That's ridiculous. I mean, it's not really possible, is it? If everyone did that, the world would be chaotic, crazy, and probably downright dangerous, wouldn't it?
Notice I said, in a way that you could know that your actions were precisely what was needed from you in that moment. In other words, they have to be vetted.
By whom?
That's where Kali comes in. Not that she does the vetting, but she is the example of the pure thing, the standard by which vetting is done. She is the most dramatic manifestation of the life force, the upsurge of nature's essence into manifestation. It's always on point. Actually, the word Kala, Kali is the feminine form, in Sanskrit means time. Her timing is impeccable. No hesitation there, or crippling self-consciousness. In fact, she couldn't care less about self. She is the great champion of the needs of the whole. When the time is right, the seed will push up, even through concrete. If you want to see her in action, go into a delivery room. Just think about it. For 9 months, the nurturing aspect of the feminine, not what your Kali in her terrible form represents, builds us a paradise, a sort of personal ecstasy-inducing flotation tank that we can luxuriate in and have all our needs met. Then suddenly Kali steps in and in one fell swoop, rips open the womb and ejects the newborn into the world. Not much concern for self-interest of either mom or infant, it would appear at first glance. But at a deeper level, she is serving the interest of both. Perhaps not their self-interest in the narrow sense, but the interest of the growth and evolution of each. As that archetype, Kali lives in each person. And she appears at just the right time and says, okay, now. That is, if allowed. If she is thwarted, which can be done for a while, we get out of rhythm with the universe. We then are out of tune. We are holding back. If we continue to do that, she will show up and lop off a few heads, read egos, and push us through to the next stage.
Like a storm?
Or an earthquake. In fact, you might say that right now the earth is in arrears. People have been postponing the needed changes that would ensure that the planet continues to be habitable. So she's beginning to whip up storms, quakes, disasters that will rip open the womb and push out into birth the next phase of human development on this planet.
Okay, I get the birthing part, but the image that is described for Kali is certainly not what people think of when they think of feminine.
Right. Good point. She does not seem feminine in the current westernized human mythical world. But such goddesses are common in the most indigenous cultures, where life was tied up with nature and her cycles. The modern or postmodern Eurocentric Western psyche has substantially separated itself from nature. It junked the birthing aspect of the feminine. It's too unpredictable, and it doesn't respect ego accomplishments. It's much too willing to smash them when they are in the way of personal development. Instead, people of that type have focused their version of the feminine on the receptive, the vulnerable, nurturing Mother Mary, the other side of Mary, i.e. Magdalene, who is strong, outspoken, powerful, has been banished from our inner world and even from religious iconography. They really don't want her around. She will ruin everything. Their version of feminism has been selective. Women have a choice of donning a business suit or grabbing a briefcase and entering the halls of corporate or government control, or staying at home, or in the classroom, or the nursing room, or the secretarial pool, or fill in the blank, and settling for the role of nurturing and supporting the masculine ego. Even the prototypical expression of birthing feminine energy, the actual delivery of a newborn, has increasingly been banished. Obstetricians often find the Kali scene too disruptive. She doesn't go by hospital schedules. She makes a mess. All those smelly fluids and that blood everywhere. And anyway, how can I plan my 9 holes of golf when I don't know when I need to be in the delivery room? So I better use my phallic scalpel and do this job in a neat, predictable, and efficient way. The result is an absurd percentage of deliveries done by C-section, far beyond what can be explained by medical necessity.
And you think that happens because some hole, some missing piece in the concept of the feminine?
Indeed, I do. It is an impoverished image of the feminine, not that the nurturing aspect of the feminine is trivial. It is essential. Without nurturance, we all perish. So there is a need to find outside, or more maturely, inside oneself, the other, more yin side of the feminine, in order to ensure well-being. But simply nurturing with no evolution, no transformation, is stagnation, and we are likely to end up bloated, complacent, and bored. For transformation is the essence of living systems. Life forms are made up of an interlocking web of biochemical, physiological, electrical, and psychological transformative processes. When this slows significantly, we cease to feel alive. When it stops, we die. It is only the Kali mode, the birthing aspect of the feminine, that can bring something new into the world. Transformation is not possible without her. In other words, you cannot access her, bring her into play. You cannot make any real change. You can rearrange the deck chair, so to speak, but you won't come up with a sofa or a plan to get off the ship before it sinks. The same principle holds true with the collective psyche. If humanity as a family, a country, or a planet cannot find, honor, and make room for her, they merely repeat themselves. An ostensible change is merely the same old thing in a slightly altered form, old wine in new wineskins. Therefore, it should not baffle us that global warming continues unabated as such collective bodies have their meetings, pass resolutions, and by and large fail miserably to alter the general course of events.
So, when you say we must all individually and collectively find her and allow her to act, that includes me?
Well, not really. For the most part, you exhibit the yang feminine quite nicely. You are it. Shakti is the very energy of Spanda's expression.
But you were talking about Kali.
Yes, your alter ego.
She is a bit intimidating.
That's an understatement.
What I mean is that I hesitate to take on that role, certainly to look the part.
It seems that humans share that reticence. But refusing to give Spanda room to express not only leads to stagnation and frustration, she, inside, will get frustrated and unmanageable and burst forth in ways one might not wish to have to deal with.
Like mass murder?
Well, that can be a twisted version of it. In your case, it is Kali in her purer form. For most people, i.e. humans, who may have various unaddressed, shadowy stuff cluttering their inner spaces, it can get distorted. But if the personal strikes a little too close to home, they should try looking at the collective. If they don't let her step forward and birth something truly new for our planetary agenda, humankind faces possible annihilation. Kali rising is sort of a remedial measure. Her rampage is a response to the squelching of spontaneity. Let's get back to Spanda itself, how to live through its action. Then Kali's work is kept to a minimum.
I like that better. So how do I know when I'm being genuinely spontaneous and when I'm just telling myself I am? What does it feel like?
You do ask good questions. That's one of the big ones. It's easy to pretend to yourself that you are being free when in fact you are being run by all sorts of habits and fears. But you, personally, don't have to worry about this. With the exception of the tinge of humanness you take on so that humans can relate to you, you are Shakti, the very essence of Spanda.
I get that, but how do they, humans, tell the difference? Speak to my tinge of humanness.
Generous of you. It has to be done through the body. That's why Tantra itself is often the embodied spirituality. The throb that is the primordial essence of Spanda can be felt in your physical being. It's the engine behind your desire to stretch sensually when you first get out of bed on a beautiful day, when you've slept well, eaten well, and aren't fighting fatigue, I should add. What you responded to when you reached up toward the ceiling was Spanda. It comes from deep inside the earthiness of your being. It is the call to participate joyfully in the coordinated dance of the natural world. Following it gives you a pleasure that is full-bodied, in the fullest sensual sense of the expression. Spanda is that thing, the ignoring of which makes you feel thwarted in your innermost being. Spanda is what you follow when you have the most delicious sex. Spanda is the spark that ignites the fire of life.
Great promo. There should be hordes of humans lining up for that. I'm sold.
Well, I'm not surprised. It's what you are. Shakti is the prototypical expression of Spanda. And as that essence of the feminine, you are much more attuned and responsive to it than I am.
What do you mean? Men don't have it?
No, I don't mean that at all. And I assume you're talking about male-bodied humans, which I'm really not, of course. I'm just a god, specifically the archetypical pattern that can throw forth into the mundane human world a manifestation of the most elegant, non-violent, yet outrageously sexy masculinity. Human men, however, have Spanda just like female-bodied humans. It's just that their preoccupation and often nearly exclusive focus on their masculine leads them to ignore or even deny their feminine. And Spanda is clearly in the feminine department. That's why when a woman says, "I just feel like it's the right thing to do," you're generally better off following her than when a man says the same thing.
Okay, let's say I'm human. When I feel the inner impulse to get up and go to the freezer for a third bowl of chocolate ice cream, is that Spanda?
Would you really, on checking with your innermost self, say, "I just feel like it's the right thing to do"?
Not really.
What would you say on that little inner inventory before shuffling off to the fridge?
Okay, well, I'm leaning a bit heavily on my tinge of humanness here, but I'd say it's a bad habit that would probably, if I were in a human body, leave me feeling yucky and bloated the next morning.
Like you do. You're overweight, my dear. You're overweight. Sorry.
Sounds like you don't really have a problem identifying Spanda.
Well, I shouldn't, right? But if I were a human, I suspect that I wouldn't find it so easy, or I wouldn't want to admit it if I did. It would sort of spoil the fun.
Does it really? Feeling yucky and bloated doesn't sound like such a fun fest. I'd say that following Spanda is a much more foolproof path to more fun.
Okay, following what really feels right inside, what emerges from your essence doesn't always lead to delightful experiences either. It can also get you in uncomfortable jams.
Uncomfortable, perhaps, but I'll bet not boring. And I'll wager you feel more alive than when you don't follow that little spark.
True. And the Kali part of me is in total agreement.
The tantric path will go for more alive every time.
Okay, I can see that, and I'm on board. But what is the humble human supposed to do with the habit that gets her out of the chair and off to the fridge? Unless you can help her with that, it's pretty much all theory, as far as I can see.
So glad you asked. That leads us into the exploration of our next foundational principle, the use of tapas. Is that where I should stop?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Beautiful. Oh, so yeah, we'll spend a few moments if there's any comments or questions about what was just read. and then we'll move into the second reading. So
let me interject here one thing that I should have said at the beginning. That is that this reading is from a book called Kali Rising, and Kali Rising is a tantric writing, and the classic form of a tantra, which is a writing about tantra, it's called a tantra. The classic form is that it begins with Shakti saying, the world is suffering, people are having a difficult time. Will you, Shiva, shed some of your brilliant light on what this is about and what we can do about it? And then in most of the classic scriptures, the rest is just Shiva talking. But in this more current form of the writing, Shakti doesn't always agree, or she has questions, or she challenges Shiva. And so you won't find this in the classic versions of a tantra. But speaking as the person who wrote this down, I'll just have to say that that's what came through. I mean, she didn't just sit there and listen. She said, wait a minute, I don't think I agree with that. And that made it a lot more interesting to me, who was busily being stenographer. So I hope it's interesting to you as well. And I think it really does help us deal with our inner conflicts between our own inner Shiva and Shakti, which I should also clarify. The book explains that my Shiva and my Shakti aren't totally as pure as the ones speaking in the dialogue, because they have been affected by social conditioning. And so we speak of those as the somewhat distorted masculine, distorted Shiva, and the distorted version of Shakti. So we're trying both to listen to our inner dialogue and at the same time kind of uncover the authentic voice of Shiva within us and the authentic voice of Shakti within us, in order to be able to move toward the inner marriage, the marriage between the masculine and feminine within each of us. So that's just a little more background about the dialogues. So yeah, any questions or comments that people have at this point? Yes.
Beautiful, Rudy. Thank you so much, everyone, for this offering. Kali Rising is one of my favorite books, and I love your format that instead of a monologue of Shiva, it's a dialogue, and it's very fresh, and it's just so much more readable than the very old classic Tantra text that I've read.
Thank you.
I never heard it read aloud before. I've read it when you first wrote it. I read a draft of it to give you feedback, and this is fantastic. And I never heard it read aloud. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
it comes alive. It comes alive.
I don't know his name.
Joseph, unmute yourself. Joseph, unmute yourself first.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, I love the wisdom of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, but my interest is what you said. It's that last part, it's the wisdom of, I call Sun Tzu. We got the vision, we got the passion, we have maybe a strategy, I haven't seen that yet, and then even a strategy requires the tactics. Otherwise, if you don't know how to shoot a bow, you ain't going to win the battle. So all the talk has got to come down to strategy and tactics. And that's what I'd really be interested in hearing from us and you and others. What do we do? Because that's where we're at in the real world. The corporatocracy, the power seekers have got control. I mean, this is Roman emperors plus,
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I'd
great.
love to hear. I'd love to hear more about tantric strategy.
Yes.
How's that?
So the dialogue is the first half of the book, and the second half of the book is all about the strategies you're talking about the application of these principles, and it starts with the individual health of each person and how we relate to our bodies, as most of us, male and female, relate as the masculine in terms of the way we treat our bodies. And then it goes into relationships between men and women, and then it goes into our connection with nature. And then, sorry. And then it goes into political and economic scene, and how Shiva and Shakti, these principles relate to how we got ourselves into this economic and political mess. And then last, of course, it goes into the spiritual life.
I love, though, you're just saying again, I resonate, because it has to begin with, even neurophysiologically, it has to begin with the body, the embodied self, because the brain, if the body's in bad condition, you know from Taoist tradition too, the brain cannot think properly and devise good strategies. So the condition of the body is the essential base, the ground, it seems, before you can even think properly about strategies and tactics. I agree with that. I think that's exactly right.
Absolutely. And that's why we do yoga before we do Tantra.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Anyone else?
Hi, it's Cece.
Great.
As I was listening to the beautiful reading, thank you, Michael and Ellen, I was really curious how it would land if Shiva were read by a female-bodied person and Shakti read by a male-bodied person.
Yes, and we have done it that way in the teacher's training course on a number of occasions. In fact, I have been Shakti on multiple occasions, which is actually a lot more fun than being Shiva. Oh.
And Cece, we talked about that.
Anybody else? Who
back
else
and
would
forth.
have a comment or a question before we move on to the next segment?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Go ahead,
Right.
Shane.
Great. So for our next section here, we've got Lisa Thompson, who is from New Jersey, and David Sully, who's from Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to move into the fourth principle, which is Tantra operates in various realities, the quote unquote normal world being the least real.
I feel more grounded.
That is my job.
But you do it so well.
You've got it backwards. The way I do it is the definition of doing it well.
You are divine.
As I was saying,
Sounds like you're in the mood for more explication.
as much as I ever will be, hit me up.
Well, what I was saying was about our being divine.
What do you mean?
The relationship between the human world and ours?
Far from clear for me. I'd love you to throw a little light on it.
That is my job, and I am delighted to oblige. First off, they say we don't exist.
Who says that?
Humans.
They really say that.
Yep, they do.
That's pretty cheeky.
Well, they've never lacked for arrogance.
Look who's talking.
All right, I'm not going to argue with that.
How many humans say that?
That we don't exist? A lot. Mostly those outside India.
But even if they don't call us Shiva and Shakti, they must know we exist. We're right there inside of them.
That's the problem. They're mostly pretty out of touch with what's inside of them.
Oh.
The good news is a lot of them are beginning to look inside. I think it has to do with having made such a mess of the outside. Anyhow, whatever works, but they are more and more sitting quietly, meditation in English, and looking inwardly. A man returns to himself when he awakens from sleep. Likewise, I have perceived from the God and the goddess by waking from my ego. Janashar. If they persist in that, I don't see how they can miss us. Which brings me to our current theme, the different realities that a human encounters during the inward journey and where along the way we live.
I'd love it if you'd shed some of your famous light on that.
Well, operationally for the human mind, moving inward as she sits quietly after disengaging from the outer world, if she can manage that, she will encounter another space or reality, which is made up of visual images, archetypal figures, dreamlike sequences. Though it can get cluttered with lots of stuff brought along from the outside world, if she sits long and patiently enough, the outlines begin to emerge of this other world. In Sanskrit, it's called Tejasa, the world of primal entities that spawns and gives shape to the outer world in which humanity lives.
How does it shape the outer world?
I was afraid that you were going to ask me that. It's hard to explain. Maybe for human, it's most useful to say how it doesn't work. In other words, most folks on Earth assume that something appears because it is fabricated, like in a factory, a very materialistic, mechanistic concept. I take these materials and combine them in such and such a way, and I produce an object. This way of thinking carries over into how they assume the world around them and those who inhabit it come into being. But it isn't necessarily so. You and I are familiar with other realities and can grasp that the mechanistic version of causality is the exception rather than the rule. It is the way material things are reshaped and rearranged to make something new. But it isn't new in the way that a newborn baby is.
I agree. It's different. But how is it different? Or why is it different?
Because it's not a creation in the sense that the word is understood in English. It's more an emergence out of the seed of another level of being.
I have no idea what you're saying.
Okay. Like you and I are the seeds that the word, that you and I are the seeds out of which spring the masculine and feminine aspects of each person on earth.
Thank you. That's much better. That's something I've experienced, felt.
Humans might have a bit more trouble with it.
Probably. But you mentioned different realities, so I assume you're going to specify more than just these two. I want to hear the rest.
So what I was just talking about has been called the mythical, not because its existence is a myth, as humans would generally have it, but because it is where the stories live that shape us.
You mean they shape us as in being our point of origin, or that they shape us in an ongoing way?
More the ongoing way. Origin is deeper. Ever notice when a person is listening to a story with rapt attention, their eyes glaze over? They have clearly entered what humans call an altered state of consciousness. The trouble with that term is that it implies that their everyday waking consciousness is reality with a capital R, the real reality. Anything else is an altered state. Of course, to us, who are accustomed to traversing realities like humans do neighborhoods, it sounds rather small-minded. When they enter that state, they are actually shifting into the mythical structure of consciousness. And the story they hear is very likely reconfiguring their mythical reality.
Makes me shudder to think, what's happening when they flock to the cinema? Or worse, sit for hours in front of their televisions watching trashy movies.
Now, let's focus on the possibility that they will get their fill, tire of it, and begin to see exactly how having their stories restructured is affecting them.
Is that optimistic?
Maybe, but only if there's no waking up happening. And I think there is.
So what's the next consciousness structure? Aren't there more?
Yes, definitely. Deeper than this dreamscape, the mythical or behind it, or at a higher frequency, however you want to think of it, is the realm of light, energy, largely formless, image-free swirls and streamings. That has been termed prajna in Sanskrit. Pra, first, and ja, knowledge, or in English, the magic structure of consciousness. Again, magic not because it is unreal. The choice of these terms bears witness to the poverty of words available in English to designate subtle phenomena. But because it is the realm where consciousness can make things happen through intention and non-physical action.
You sort of said that you and I live in the mythical, but we also live in this space too, what you're calling the magic, right? I mean, I do. If it's the realm of energy, my name, Shakti, means energy.
Of course, you're right. Our existence extends into the realm of energy and light, though it is primarily in the mythical where humans experience this.
Doesn't the existence of humans extend there too?
Yes, but they are not conscious of it. Their focus is so fixed on their grosser physical structure.
Can't that change?
Sure. And when it does, they sort of morph into subtler beings, what we would call siddhas, or they might call shamans.
So why must these realms be inhabited so separately by different ones of us? You know that I'm a fan of inclusivity.
Good point. It's only the attachment to a limited identity or ego, which is another word for the same thing, that blocks humans from being more inclusive of all these inner realms. In other words, their self-concept is so limited that they can only inhabit one, and one designed to be limited enough so they can handle it.
Can't we help?
I'm not sure there's much we can do. They have to get bored with the ego stuff.
What happens then?
They get curious and start venturing beyond their limited reality.
Is it really that simple? Just waiting for them to get fed up with their nonsense? Isn't that sort of like Nero fiddling while Rome burns? If I have my human history straight.
Yes, it does take time. But we have plenty of that. Remember that time, my goodness, what am I thinking? Remember that time when we were having sex for 1,000 years and all the other gods were waiting for us to conceive Skanda?
Yeah, but time for them, for humans, is different. They have themselves caught in a time trap.
I hear your concern, but isn't this a little trick of your own? After all, Kali literally means time, and she is known to use time to humble the stubborn ego with the ravages of age.
Well, I've had to do that. They just weren't getting with the program. It's gentler than lopping off heads, isn't it?
Yes, dear. Maybe not as effective, though. And in the long run, can you really say there's less suffering? Or could there even be more?
Why, sometimes I think you might be egging me on. I mean, as Kali.
I'll leave that timing to her. I'm sure you know better than me, but I get the sense that she's getting ready to rise up.
What other recourse do we have?
Well, it's ultimately about the marriage, the union of masculine and feminine that will open the third eye. Humans need to be curious enough to at least explore that possibility, the union. But we know that that is also nudged along by our dialogue here. The more we understand each other, the more we enter into this union ourselves, and then the more they are prompted to do so within themselves.
So it all comes back to the marriage. That's fine with me. I'm delighted to make conversation and love with you indefinitely. But my yin feminine side does feel for the human dilemma. And my Kali is appropriately impatient when they don't move along developmentally.
And there will be no marriage if Kali is not included. I mean you. And I cannot really come to a union if I don't accept the Kali side of you. And humans can't have an inner marriage until they accept their own yang feminine, i.e. their own Shakti and their own Kali. Maybe they will never do that without her showing up to shake things loose on a large scale. They may need to see what happens and then also see what it forces them into, what changes they that needed to be made to find more happiness and joy. Maybe that's what it will take for them to come to really love her the way I have.
I'm touched. No, really. But I have one more question. What exactly happens to humans when the third eye opens?
Then the structures of consciousness we talked about are all in the human's awareness. He is aware of the everyday mundane world, the mental, the mythical world, and the magic, as well as the origin from which it all emerges, but not aware of them in sequence as now happens. One during the day, then that is blotted out, and then there's only awareness of one of the others during one phase of sleep, and then that's lost and another moves into awareness. That sort of serial schizophrenia. Instead, it's as though you can see them all transparent as transparent overlays, one on top of the other. What that is a completely new structure of consciousness. Another broader, and you will be glad to hear, more inclusive consciousness that is now often being called the integral.
Sort of like us.
Exactly. To be more specific, a consciousness that moves beyond time, space, and causality.
They become gods.
Well, something close to that.
I can't wait to see it happen. But it could get crowded up here.
You know better than that. It's beyond time, space.
I'm only teasing you.
Beautiful.
So we had a role reversal.
Yeah. That, who was it?
David.
Cece asked for, I think.
Yeah.
Somebody asked for.
Cece was curious about.
Yeah, so we had a male doing Shakti and a female doing Shiva. And you can hear the same dynamic. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So do we have time for some comments, questions? Anyone have a question or a comment or something to share?
If you do, please say your name and then begin your question or comment so we know who's speaking.
Yes?
Go ahead.
So,
Yes.
Oh, am I on?
Yes.
Joseph, Taoist name is White Crane Spreads Wings. You know, this is beautiful. It seems like this is cyclic and that there's no goal, because the Greeks did this with Eros, which is the same thing, the spirit of love, spiritual unity. Boredom has never worked to change people. Crisis has, but always produces another round. The one jewel in the crown is exactly the love union. But even that is not a dependable vehicle. Maybe it's all cyclical. Maybe we're just waiting for Godot, but maybe it's just, there is no goal here, a journey without a goal, because none of them has worked. Anyway, your comments.
Yeah. Well, that last structure of consciousness or last reality that Shiva was describing actually is at this point very difficult for us to comprehend. And we are, from that point of view, we're sort of stuck in the mental in the West, stuck in a kind of arid, sterile mental way of seeing the world and experiencing ourselves, which has its physical counterpart, by the way, in the shopping mall, you know, kind of empty and sterile and devoid of life. So that answer to your question lives in this new structure of consciousness, but at this point it's hard for us to imagine it. It's only as we step into the experience of holding all these realities transparently, that is to say simultaneously, though that's not the correct word because it's not about time, but holding these jointly in our awareness, not sequentially, but all at once in the eternal now, begins to open for us the possibility of understanding the solutions that you're talking about. And that we won't find them in any other way. You're right, they just seem not to be there. But we need a new consciousness to be able to see them, to grasp them, to move, to develop the strategies to move into them. And so that is the subject of all the great teachings of the East, actually, which is that particular consciousness. It's called in the Upanishads Turiya, which means the fourth state. And it's long been known, it's long been described, it's long been experienced by people who meditated deeply for a long time and found their way into this different reality, so to speak. And this different reality is a combination of all the other realities, so it's complete. So that's the rather tantalizing answer, I think, because it's there, it's just that we can't seem to quite grasp it. Yes.
So it just seems, I love that what you say. It seems that it's really an Atman thing. It's an individual thing. And it's like the wipeouts of animals, forest fires, plagues, virus attacks. That's not what counts. Nature and Kali have no interest in the wipeouts. It seems like it really comes down to individual realization. And everything has to come from there. And that's the only thing you have control of. That's the only thing I have control of. I don't have control of anything beyond that. So I'm going to begin there. You've guided me well.
Good policy. Very good. Thank you.
Someone else.
You know, I find myself, as we are doing this and as I was listening to this, thinking a lot about, of course, what's going on in all of the cities in the United States in particular right now, with these protests and the unrest and sort of the inner angst that had been swirling in me as day after day it's being reported and I see it. And then I come to this sitting and listen to what's happening. And then in this particular instance, layer on that you have a masculine bodied person in a feminine role and a feminine bodied person in a masculine role. And your mind, or my mind, wants to go every time, okay, it's a man in a feminine role, it's a woman in a masculine role. And then it kind of goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it speeds up and speeds up and speeds up until it's just blurred. And then when it's blurred, it's quiet and peaceful and serene, because it's not about the masculine, it's not about the feminine anymore. It's that union that comes together. And then in that union space, when I go back to that same situation of the turmoil that's going on in the world, there's calmness. It's like being in the eye of the hurricane and having the ball of consciousness in your hand. And at any point, you could expand that ball so it completely disperses everything that's going on from a turmoil standpoint. Or it could be so small that you hold it, you know, in the palm of your hand and you protect it as you move away from whatever that circumstance or situation is to somewhere else. And I think that for me was a beautiful thing to witness and to experience, because it was a solution for me to learn how to navigate through turmoil and challenge, and to know that at any point the only challenge for me is to connect with a higher level of consciousness, so I can move through this what's the word? Oh, these deficient states in a much more graceful way, and hopefully interact in a much more elegant way through these deficient states, whether it's with an individual or whether it's with a collective. It really was profound for me to hear the reading and what it brought up in that regard for me.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I enjoyed hearing it too. I love hearing it. I always feel like I'm learning. I'm always hearing it for the first time in a way. Yeah.
This is Adam. I have a question. And
yes, Adam.
Thank you everyone for this. And part of this question comes from discussions with Arabella, but it's about how do we, if we're being called into the integral, into Turiya, how do we function in this world that's still stuck in the mental? How do I pay rent and walk my dog in the integral while everything else is in that mental structure?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. It reminds me of a story about my teacher who went into the mountains for 7 years. He meditated in the mountains and went through these incredible openings and epiphanies and, you know, acquaintance, I assume, with this integral structure of consciousness. And he came down from the mountains finally. He got the sort of inner message that, all right, it's time now to go back and help. The world's in a mess. And so he goes down out of the mountains to this little town, and he stands for 3 hours. He stood at the side of the road trying to figure out, how do you cross the road? All these people are going back and forth, you know. It was very challenging, but you know, he gradually learned how to function in the world while he didn't really lose touch with that consciousness. And he described it as meditation in action. How to be in meditation and yet act in the world. And I think if you get the hang of it, it's probably the simplest and most efficient way to function in the world, because you are coming from so much more awareness. And ordinarily we have this very limited awareness of what's going on and try to do something productive or helpful, and often it backfires or actually does the opposite, whatever. So it's maybe a good idea. Take 7 years going to the mountains and then come back, and also take another year or two to learn how to bring that consciousness into functioning in the world. But perhaps that's what we're all going to be facing, is how to bring the integral consciousness into a functioning planet. We need that. We need that challenge, and let's maybe we should get on with that instead of some of the other things we're toying with. Thank you, Adam, for the question. How are we doing for time?
We can take another question.
Hmm?
We can take another question.
Carol says we have time for another question. Anybody has one? Question, comment?
Although there's no time.
No, here we are in linear time. So we have, and if no one has one, you have announcements.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll do a question. What are as I'm like practicing moving through the different states of consciousness and holding them, I'll notice some ego contraction. What are ways to kind of consciously work with that when you notice that the ego starts to get nervous about it? And what are ways to work with that?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is in volumes of writings on yoga and meditation and spirituality. There's so many techniques. What's the right technique for a specific person is found somewhere in there probably. So the more you learn about yoga, the more you learn about meditation, the more you learn about Tantra, the more you read, the more likely you are to encounter just those specific techniques that work best for you. But there's some that work pretty well for almost everyone. And one of them is the breath. How to be fully conscious of the breath. How to breathe in a way that is not egotistical. Try that for size. How we breathe affects and sustains so many of the habits we have that aren't good. So if you really study your breath, sit quietly and watch yourself breathe, you'll discover that there are many dimensions to the breath. I mean, I can breathe in a way that closes down my connection with the universe. Or I can breathe in a way that opens every pore of my being so that the breath is coming in from the universe and going back out into the universe. Very different experience. And that's just one dimension of the breath. So working with the breath, working with your thought patterns, but meditation is kind of at the center of it all because it's all about increasing our awareness. And we can say ego consciousness and that really we don't grasp what it is because we're so in it. So we need the distance. We need to be able to step back and look at it and watch it happen. And that distance, that perspective is available in meditation, but when you're busily operating in the world, it's very difficult to see that and to feel the difference and notice, oh, now I'm really in the ego. Okay, people may tell you, and that's sometimes helpful, but more often than not, we say, oh, no, you don't understand. Actually, I'm not being ego. So breath work, meditation, that's the best bang for your buck.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, readers. Thank you, Shiva and Shakti.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, Linda is on the road somewhere. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you who tuned in and added your energy to this exploration of the conversation between our inner Shiva and Shakti.
So I'm going to do a little promo.
Please.
So Kali Rising, if you don't have a copy, You can find it on Amazon, I'm pretty sure.
That's a better
Yeah.
cover.
And if you can't find it there, please reach out to us at Dancing Shiva. We are ordering more copies, and so we can help you with that.
It is, Gerald, it is on Amazon. It's also on Bookshop.
Great. Thank you,
That's-
Arabella.
Sorry.
Thank you. So next week, we will be here again, Sunday night, same time. And Rudy G will be doing another meditation with the series Health and Serenity that we've been doing. And then the following week, we will have Vianna Bergen. Let's see, is that right? Next week is 7th. Yes, Vianna Bergen will be doing a chat. I don't have the title yet, but it'll come out in the announcement. So stay tuned for that. And then once again, thank you all. Thank you to all of you who have sent in donations for this series, for this time. It helps us because of our programming and our events are no longer happening.
Yeah.
So this keeps us going. So thank you so much, and it's delightful to see you, and we love that people are connecting and seeing each other that haven't seen each other in a while, and we certainly hope to see you again next week. So take this home with you. Hopefully the reading will resonate and land somewhere with you and shift something in your life. And as always, if you have questions or comments or want to know more at other times between the sessions, reach out to us at dancingshivatantra.com, dancingshivatantra@gmail.com, and or give us a call, and we'd love to talk with you.
Visit the website.
Or visit the website, dancingshivatantra.com. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Ravi Ji.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.